The hallways of Westfield Academy of Arts fell silent as the last bell rang. Students rushed out of classrooms carrying expensive instrument cases and designer backpacks. The prestigious school, with its polished marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows, emptied quickly as luxury cars pulled up outside to take the young musicians home. But for Miguel Sanchez, his day was just beginning. He pushed his cleaning cart down the empty corridor, the squeaky wheel echoing against the walls. Miguel had been the janitor at Westfield for almost 20 years now. At 58, his once black hair had faded to salt and pepper, and deep lines creased the corners of his eyes. Those eyes, though tired, still held a certain spark when they fell upon the Academy's crown jewels, 12 Steinway grand pianos housed in individual practice rooms. "Good evening, Mr. Sanchez," called Mrs. Henderson, the elderly receptionist who always stayed late to finish paperwork. "Evening, Mrs. Henderson," Miguel replied with a warm smile. "Beautiful day today, isn't it?" "Indeed it is. Don't work too hard now," she said, gathering her belongings. Miguel nodded politely. Their exchange was almost the same every day, a small ritual of acknowledgement in a place where he was largely invisible. As Mrs. Henderson's footsteps faded, Miguel began his usual routine. He dusted the trophy cases first, fingers lingering momentarily on a framed photo of the school's founder shaking hands with a world-famous pianist. Then he moved on to the classrooms, emptying trash bins and wiping down desks where future virtuosos had scribbled notes and doodled in margins. The practice rooms were always last on his list, not because they were difficult to clean, but because Miguel secretly looked forward to them. When the building was completely empty, he could take his time there, soaking in the atmosphere of rooms designed for musical greatness. Tonight, the sunset streamed through the windows, casting long golden rectangles across the floor, as Miguel pushed his cart toward practice room 3. He knocked softly out of habit, though he knew no one would be there at this hour. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and the subtle, unmistakable scent of old sheet music. The black Steinway stood, majestically in the center, its lid propped open. Sheet music had been left on the stand, Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. Miguel smiled to himself. It was one of his favorites. Few people knew that Miguel Sanchez had once been considered a musical prodigy. Back in his small hometown outside of Veracruz, Mexico, he had been the boy wonder, the child who could play any melody after hearing it just once. His parents, though poor, had scraped together enough money for lessons with the local church pianist, an old man who had once studied at a conservatory in Mexico City. "This boy has a gift from God," the teacher had told Miguel's parents. "He must pursue this talent." And for a while, he had. Miguel won local competitions, then regional ones. By 16, he was preparing to audition for a prestigious music academy in the capital. The future seemed bright, full of concert halls and standing ovations. Then life intervened, as it often does. His father fell ill, cancer that spread quickly and mercilessly. Medical bills piled up. Miguel's mother took on 3 jobs. His younger sisters needed food, clothes, school supplies. The piano lessons stopped. The competitions became a memory. Miguel found work in construction, then at a factory. His hands, once trained to float delicately over ivory keys, became calloused and rough from manual labor. When he was 25, with his father long gone and his sisters grown, Miguel made the difficult decision to cross the border into the United States. "For a better life," he told his weeping mother. "I'll send money back, I promise." He kept that promise. For 33 years, Miguel had worked and sent money home faithfully. He'd married Lucia, a kind woman who worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families. They had 2 children, Ana, now a nurse, and Rafael, studying engineering on scholarship at the State University. Miguel was immensely proud of them both. But the music had become a private ache, a dream deferred for so long it sometimes felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Miguel's hands moved methodically as he wiped down the chalkboard, erasing the day's music theory lessons. He swept the floor, careful to get the corners where dust liked to gather. All the while, his eyes kept drifting to the piano. When he finished cleaning, Miguel checked his watch. 7:15 p.m. He was ahead of schedule. The night security guard, Tom, wouldn't make his rounds through this part of the building until 8 p.m. Miguel stood still, listening. The building creaked and settled around him, but there were no human sounds. He was completely alone. Slowly, almost reverently, he approached the piano. He placed his cleaning rag on a nearby chair and wiped his hands on his uniform pants. Then, taking a deep breath, Miguel lowered himself onto the bench. The keys felt cool beneath his fingertips. He didn't press down at first, just let his hands remember their proper position, a muscle memory that had never truly left him. Then, softly, he began to play a simple scale, just to hear the perfect pitch of the expertly maintained instrument. Fiker. Sound filled the room, crisp and clear. Miguel closed his eyes. For a moment he was 16 again, full of promise and possibility. He turned his attention to the sheet music left on the stand. Chopin. The piece was notoriously difficult, with technical challenges that tested even the most accomplished pianists. Miguel hadn't played it in decades, but his fingers remembered. Tentatively at first, then with growing confidence he began to play. The opening notes rang out. Questioning. Searching. Then came the cascading arpeggios, like water tumbling, over rocks. Miguel's hands stretched and contracted, finding the complex chord progressions without hesitation. As he played, something inside him unwound. The years of quiet resignation, of watching talented young people take for granted what he had lost, it all melted away. There was only the music speaking through him as it had when he was young. Miguel didn't hear the door open. He didn't notice the young woman who stood frozen in the doorway, her water bottle halfway to her lips, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. Charlotte Waverly had stayed late to practice for her upcoming recital. As the daughter of Thomas Waverly, the Academy's most generous donor, she was used to having access to the best practice rooms whenever she wanted. Practice Room 3, with its perfect acoustics, was her favorite. She had stepped out briefly to refill her water bottle, frustrated, with a passage she couldn't quite master despite weeks of practice. Now returning to find the janitor sitting at her piano, her space, playing her piece with effortless grace, Charlotte felt a strange mix of emotions wash over her. Indignation came first. How dare he touch the piano she had been assigned? Didn't he know these instruments were reserved for students only? But as she listened, another feeling crept in. Awe. The janitor was playing the very section she had been struggling with, but his interpretation had a depth and emotional quality that made her own attempts seem mechanical by comparison. Miguel's eyes remained closed, lost in the music. His weathered face reflected every emotional shift in the piece. The tender moments, the passionate crescendos, the wistful retreats. His entire body swayed slightly with the rhythm, completely surrendered to the composition. Charlotte stood motionless, the water bottle now forgotten in her hand. She had grown up surrounded by music. Her parents had taken her to concerts since she was a toddler. She had heard some of the world's greatest pianists perform, but there was something raw and genuine about this man's playing that touched her in an unexpected way. The piece built toward its dramatic climax, Miguel's hands flying across the keys with surprising agility for someone his age. When he reached the final notes, they hung in the air like a question left unanswered. In the silence that followed, Miguel opened his eyes. The spell broken, reality came rushing back. This wasn't his piano. This wasn't his world. He was the janitor, nothing more. He stood quickly, nearly knocking over the bench in his haste. That's when he noticed Charlotte standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Their eyes met for a brief moment. The wealthy student and the immigrant janitor, connected by the music that still seemed to vibrate in the air between them. Miguel's face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, reaching for his cleaning rag. "I shouldn't have—" "What's going on in here?" came a sharp voice from the hallway. Ms. Blackwell, one of the stricter teachers, appeared behind Charlotte, her thin eyebrows raised in disapproval. "Mr. Sanchez, explain yourself." Charlotte turned to her teacher, then back to Miguel. The moment of connection was gone. Now there was only the awkward reality of boundaries crossed, of an employee overstepping his place. Miguel stood with his head slightly bowed, his moment of musical freedom evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. He didn't know that in a few moments his life was about to change forever, that the talent he had buried for decades was about to be dramatically uncovered. He didn't know that Charlotte Waverly, despite her initial reaction, would soon play a pivotal role in his long-delayed musical redemption. All he knew was the familiar feeling of shame, of being caught reaching for something that wasn't meant for people like him. But the music he had played, that couldn't be taken away. For those few precious minutes, Miguel Sanchez had been himself again, completely and truly for the first time in many years. The silence in practice room 3 was thick enough to touch. Miguel stood with his hands clasped in front of him, eyes fixed on the floor as Ms. Blackwell's disapproving gaze moved between him and the piano. "I asked you a question, Mr. Sanchez," she repeated, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Miguel cleared his throat. I finished cleaning early and—" The words stumbled over each other. How could he explain what the music meant to him without sounding foolish? Charlotte Waverly stood in the doorway, still clutching her water bottle. At 17, she was the Academy's star pupil, with her sleek blonde hair always perfectly styled and her designer clothes never showing a wrinkle. Her father's name graced the main concert hall, and her mother chaired half the fundraising committees. Charlotte had grown up believing that talent and privilege naturally went hand in hand. "He was touching my piano," she said, her voice carrying the casual entitlement of someone who had never been denied anything. Ms. Blackwell's thin lips pressed together even tighter. "Mr. Sanchez, you know the rules. These instruments are extremely valuable and reserved exclusively for our students." Miguel nodded, the color rising in his weathered cheeks. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. It won't happen again." "See that it doesn't," Ms. Blackwell replied. She turned to Charlotte. "Ms. Waverly, do continue with your practice. The winter showcase is only 3 weeks away." She swept out of the room, leaving Miguel and Charlotte in another awkward silence. Miguel moved quickly to retrieve his cleaning cart from the corner. "I'll be out of your way in just a moment," he murmured, not meeting her eyes. Charlotte didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked slowly to the piano and ran her fingers along its polished surface, as if checking for damage. Finally, she turned to face him. "How did you learn to play like that?" she asked. There was something new in her voice, curiosity mingled with confusion. Miguel paused, surprised by the question. "A long time ago," he said simply. "In another life. But that passage, the one with the left-hand crossovers, I've been stuck on it for weeks. You played it perfectly." Miguel shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to students noticing him, let alone speaking to him. "It's all in the wrist," he said after a moment. "You have to relax here." He made a subtle motion with his hand, then caught himself. "But I should go." "Wait," Charlotte said. But Miguel was already pushing his cart toward the door, eager to escape the embarrassment of being caught where he didn't belong. As the door closed behind him, Charlotte stood motionless, beside the piano. She sat down on the bench, placed her hands where Miguel's had been minutes earlier, and tried again to play the troublesome passage. Her fingers felt stiff and uncooperative. Outside in the hallway, Miguel leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. What had he been thinking? 20 years at Westfield without incident, and now this. He could lose his job, the job that had put his daughter through nursing school and was helping his son through college. He pushed his cart toward the supply closet, trying to shake off the feeling of loss. For those few minutes at the piano, he had been transported back to a time when music was his future, not a painful reminder of what might have been. The next day, Miguel arrived at work early, hoping to avoid running into Ms. Blackwell or Charlotte. The incident had kept him awake most of the night. Lucia had noticed his distraction at breakfast. "What's bothering you?" she had asked, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Nothing, mi amor," he'd replied with a forced smile. Just thinking about Raphael's graduation next spring. Now, as he mopped the entrance hall, Miguel kept his head down, focusing on the repetitive motion of the mop across the floor. The first students wouldn't arrive for another hour. He had time to compose himself. "Mr. Sanchez?" The voice startled. "Him." Miguel looked up to see Charlotte Waverly standing a few feet away, clutching a leather music folder to her chest. She was never at school this early. "Ms. Waverly," he acknowledged with a small nod, then returned to his mopping. "I've been thinking about yesterday," she said, taking a step closer, "about how you played that Chopin piece." Miguel kept mopping. "I apologized for that. It won't happen again." "That's not—" Charlotte seemed frustrated. "I'm not here to complain. I'm here because I want to know how you did it." The mop stilled. Miguel looked up at her, really seeing her for the first time. Behind the perfect appearance and privileged manner, there was something else, a genuine hunger to understand. "Do what exactly?" he asked cautiously. "Make it sound like that, like it's telling a story. When I play it sounds technically correct, but when you played—" She trailed off, searching for words. "It sounded like you were speaking through the piano." Miguel leaned on his mop, considering his response. It had been so long since anyone had asked him about music. Chopin wasn't writing exercises, he said finally. He was writing about life, about joy and suffering and everything in between. If you play just the notes, that's all people will hear. Notes. Charlotte's forehead creased. "But my teacher says technique comes first. That expression follows naturally once you've mastered the notes." Miguel couldn't help the small smile that crept onto his face. "With respect to your teacher, that's backward. The feeling gives meaning to the technique, not the other way around." Look of surprise crossed Charlotte's face, as if no one had ever disagreed with her teachers before. Could you show me?" she asked hesitantly. Miguel glanced around the empty hallway. "Ms. Waverly, I'm not a teacher, I'm the janitor. If Ms. Blackwell found out—" "We have 45 minutes before anyone else arrives," Charlotte interrupted. "And I've reserved practice room 3 for early morning sessions all month." She held up a key card. "Please? Just this once?" Miguel hesitated. The sensible thing would be to refuse, to keep his head down, do his job, and forget about yesterday. But the look in Charlotte's eyes reminded him of himself at her age, eager, passionate about music, willing to learn from anyone who could help him improve. 10 minutes, he conceded. "That's all." Charlotte's face lit up with a genuine smile, perhaps the first real one he had ever seen from her. "Thank you." In practice room 3, Charlotte sat at the piano with Miguel standing awkwardly beside her. She opened her music folder and positioned the Chopin piece on the stand. "Show me the section you're having trouble with," Miguel said. Charlotte placed her hands on the keys and began to play. Her technique was indeed impeccable, every note precise, every rhythm exact. But as Miguel had noticed yesterday, something was missing. She reached the difficult passage and stumbled, her fingers tangling as they had countless times before. She made a small sound of frustration. "May I?" Miguel asked, gesturing to the bench. Charlotte nodded and slid over to make room. Miguel sat beside her, conscious of keeping a respectful distance. "Watch first," he said. He played the passage slowly, his hands moving with a fluid grace that belied his age and his rough workman's appearance. "The secret is in the preparation. Before this run, you have to set your hand position. Like this." He demonstrated again, this time narrating each movement. Charlotte watched intently, her eyes following his fingers. "Now you try," he said, moving his hands away. Charlotte positioned her hands and attempted the passage again. It was smoother, but still mechanical. "Better," Miguel said. "But you're still just playing notes. Think about what Chopin might have been feeling when he wrote this. This part here," he pointed to the score, "it's like asking a question, and this part is like yearning for an answer that doesn't come." Charlotte looked skeptical. "How do you know that's what he meant?" Miguel shrugged. "I don't know for certain. No one can. But music isn't math, Ms. Waverly. It's a language. You have to decide what you want to say through it. He glanced at his watch. I should get back to work. Wait, Charlotte said quickly. Could we do this again tomorrow? Miguel stood up, straightening his uniform. I don't think that's a good idea. Please? There was something vulnerable in her voice now. No one's ever explained it like that before. My parents spend thousands on lessons, but all my teachers talk about is technique and competitions and scholarships. Miguel thought about his own children, how he would feel if someone denied them knowledge they were hungry for. I'm not qualified to teach you, Ms. Waverly. But you are, she insisted. You clearly studied somewhere. Were you at a conservatory, Juilliard, Curtis? Miguel shook his head, a sad smile crossing his face. Nothing so grand. Just a church pianist in Mexico who believed in me. Then he taught you well, Charlotte said quietly. Miguel hesitated, then nodded once. Same time tomorrow, 10 minutes only. As he left the practice room, Miguel felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was anxiety about breaking the unspoken rules that kept the social order at Westfield. But underneath that was something he hadn't felt in decades, the satisfaction of passing on knowledge about the thing he loved most. What Miguel didn't know was that this unexpected encounter was just the beginning. He couldn't see that Charlotte Waverly, despite her privileged upbringing and occasional entitlement, was about to become an unlikely ally. He couldn't foresee that their brief musical exchange would soon escalate into a very public confrontation that would change both their lives forever. All he knew was that for 10 minutes he hadn't been just the invisible man who cleaned the floors. He had been Miguel Sanchez, pianist. And somehow, that made all the difference. For 2 weeks, Miguel and Charlotte met in secret. Always early in the morning, always for just 10 minutes. 10 minutes that gradually stretched to 15, then 20 as Charlotte's playing began to transform under Miguel's gentle guidance. Feel the music, Miguel would say, his voice soft but insistent. Don't just play it. Live it. Charlotte was a quick study. What she lacked in emotional depth she made up for in determination. Each morning she arrived having practiced what they had discussed the day before. This morning Miguel watched as Charlotte played the entire ballade without stopping. When she finished, she looked up at him expectantly. Much better, he said, with a nod. The middle section still needs work, but the opening, he smiled. The opening has soul now. Charlotte beamed at the rare compliment. It's starting to make sense. When you talk about the story behind the notes, I can hear it in my head. Miguel glanced at his watch. We should finish for today. The other students will start arriving soon. Charlotte closed the piano lid reluctantly. Tomorrow, then? Tomorrow, Miguel agreed. As they left the practice room, neither noticed Ms. Rivera, the head of the piano department, standing in the shadowed alcove near the water fountain. Her keen eyes missed nothing as she watched the janitor and the school star pupil walk in opposite directions down the hall. That afternoon, Charlotte was practicing in room 3 when her friends Zoe and Tyler knocked on the door. We're heading to Café Luna, Zoe said, tossing her dark curls over her shoulder. Take a break and come with us. Charlotte shook her head. I can't. The showcase is next week, and I still have work to do on this piece. Tyler leaned against the doorframe, his lanky frame blocking half the entrance. Come on, Charlotte, you've been practicing nonstop lately. What's gotten into you? It's just another showcase. It's important to me, Charlotte replied, turning. Back to the piano. Zoe rolled her eyes. Fine, be boring. But seriously, you've been acting weird ever since you started coming in early. She narrowed her eyes suspiciously. Are you taking secret lessons with someone? Is that why you've been so mysterious? Charlotte's hands froze over the keys. Don't be ridiculous, she said too quickly. I just want to be prepared. Tyler shrugged. Whatever. Text us if you change your mind. As they left, Charlotte exhaled slowly. She hadn't told anyone about her morning sessions with Miguel. She wasn't even sure why. Part of her knew that her friends wouldn't understand what she could possibly learn from the school janitor. They'd laugh, Or worse, they'd tell their parents, who would tell her parents, and then… Charlotte pushed the thought away and returned to practicing. She was determined to play this piece better than she'd ever played anything before. Not for her parents, not for her teachers, but for Miguel, the only person who had ever made her truly understand what music could be. The day of the winter showcase arrived with a flurry of activity. Parents in expensive winter coats filled the lobby, greeting each other with air kisses and comparing notes on their children's progress. Students in formal attire clutched sheet music and instrument cases, faces tense with pre-performance nerves. Miguel moved through the crowd invisibly, as he always did on event days. He emptied trash cans, wiped up spilled coffee, and made sure the bathrooms remained stocked and clean. No one noticed him. Just another part of the school's machinery that kept everything running smoothly. Charlotte had been scheduled to perform at 3:45 p.m. At 3:30, Miguel found an excuse to slip into the back of the recital hall, standing against the wall where the shadows were deepest. He just wanted to hear how she would do. The hall was packed. Charlotte's parents sat in the front row, her father checking emails on his phone, her mother chatting with the woman beside her. Neither seemed particularly focused on the current performer, a nervous boy struggling through a Bach prelude. Finally, Charlotte's name was called. She walked onto the stage in a simple blue dress, her usual confidence tempered with a new humility that Miguel recognized as performance anxiety, the good kind that came from truly caring about the music. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. From the first notes, Miguel could hear the difference. Charlotte was no longer just playing the correct notes in the correct order. She was telling a story through Chopin's composition, asking questions, expressing longing, building tension, and releasing it in perfect waves of sound. The audience sensed it too. The casual conversation ceased. Even Charlotte's father put down his phone. Every eye was fixed on the slender girl at the piano, whose music suddenly carried an emotional weight far beyond her years. When she reached the difficult passage, the one they had worked on so diligently, she navigated it with graceful ease, her face reflecting every nuance of the music. Miguel felt his chest tighten with pride. As the final notes faded, there was a moment of perfect silence before the audience erupted in applause. Charlotte stood and bowed, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found Miguel in his corner. She gave him a small, private smile before turning to acknowledge her beaming parents. Miguel slipped out of the hall, his heart full. It was time to finish his work in the East Wing before heading home. He was mopping the floor near practice room 1 when he heard rapid footsteps approaching. Charlotte appeared around the corner, still in her performance dress, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Did you hear?" she asked breathlessly. "Ms. Rivera wants me to perform the ballad at the citywide competition next month. She said my interpretation was the most mature she's heard from a student my age." Miguel smiled. "I'm not surprised. You played beautifully." "It's all because of you," Charlotte said earnestly. "I never would have understood the piece without your help." "You did the work," Miguel countered. "I just pointed the way." "Well, I want you to keep pointing the way. Will you help me prepare for the competition?" Before Miguel could answer, voices echoed down the hallway. Charlotte's friends Zoe and Tyler appeared, followed by several other students and Ms. Blackwell. "Charlotte." "There you are," Zoe called. "Your parents are looking everywhere for you. They want to take you to dinner to celebrate." She stopped abruptly when she noticed Miguel. "Why are you talking to the janitor?" Charlotte hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden audience. Ms. Blackwell stepped forward, her sharp eyes moving between Charlotte and Miguel. "Is everything all right, Ms. Waverly?" "Yes, everything's fine," Charlotte said quickly. She was just asking me to clean up a spill in one of the practice rooms," Miguel supplied, lowering his eyes respectfully. Tyler snorted. "Must be a pretty complicated spill. You two looked pretty deep in conversation." Charlotte lifted her chin, slightly. "Actually, I was thanking Mr. Sanchez. He's been giving me some advice about my playing." A surprised silence fell over the group. Then Tyler laughed. "The janitor? Giving you piano advice? That's hilarious." Ms. Blackwell's eyebrows shot up. "Ms. Waverly, is this some kind of joke?" No, Charlotte said firmly. Mr. Sanchez is an excellent pianist. He's been helping me understand Chopin's emotional intentions. In the ballade, Zoe's mouth fell open. Are you serious, Charlotte? Your parents pay for the best teachers in the country, and they're all very technical. Charlotte replied. Mr. Sanchez helped me find the soul of the piece. Tyler stepped closer to Miguel, looking him up and down with undisguised contempt. No offense, but shouldn't you stick to your mop? I mean, what could you possibly know about classical piano? Miguel remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. This was exactly the situation he had feared from the beginning. He knows plenty, Charlotte insisted, her voice rising slightly. He's brilliant, actually. Right, Tyler drawled. I'm sure he studied at the same prestigious conservatories as our faculty. He turned to his friends. Maybe we should all start taking lessons from the maintenance staff. The lunch lady might be a secret violin virtuoso. The other students laughed, and Miguel felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. That's enough, Tyler, Charlotte said sharply. Ms. Blackwell cleared her throat. Ms. Waverly, while your performance today was indeed exceptional, I must remind you that Mr. Sanchez is not employed as a music instructor. His duties are strictly janitorial. She turned to Miguel. And Mr. Sanchez, we've already had one discussion about boundaries. I'm afraid I'll have to report this to the administration. Miguel nodded, keeping his eyes down. I understand, ma'am. He didn't do anything wrong, Charlotte protested. I asked for his help. Nevertheless, Ms. Blackwell said coldly, there are protocols to be followed. Now your parents are waiting, Ms. Waverly. I suggest you join them. Charlotte looked at Miguel, her expression torn between loyalty and social pressure. Miguel gave her a small nod, silently telling her it was okay to go. This isn't right, she said quietly. But she turned and walked away with her friends, Zoe already whispering furiously in her ear. As the students disappeared around the corner, Miguel was left alone with Ms. Blackwell. I'm very disappointed, Mr. Sanchez, she said. 20 years of service and now this inappropriate behavior. Miguel wanted to defend himself, to explain that music had been his first love long before he ever picked up a mop. But what was the point? In their eyes, he would always be just the janitor, the invisible man who cleaned up after the talented ones. What Miguel didn't realize was that Ms. Rivera had been standing just around the corner, listening to the entire exchange. And she had recognized something in Miguel's playing days ago, something she hadn't heard in many, many years. As Miguel pushed his mop across the floor, trying to ignore the burning shame of public humiliation, he had no idea that the real revelation was yet to come. Miguel walked slowly to the storage closet, his shoulders heavy with defeat. The mop bucket squeaked as he pushed it, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. He had known this moment would come eventually. Nothing good in his life had ever lasted. He was putting away his supplies when the door opened behind him. Miguel turned, expecting to see the building manager with news of his termination. Instead, Ms. Rivera stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, over her chest. Unlike Ms. Blackwell with her pinched expression and sharp voice, Elena Rivera had kind eyes and a gentle manner that made her the student's favorite teacher. In her mid-60s, with silver-streaked black hair always pulled back in a neat bun, she carried herself with quiet dignity. Mr. Sanchez, she said, I think we need to talk. Miguel nodded resignedly. Yes, ma'am. I understand if the school wants me to leave immediately. Ms. Rivera's eyebrows rose. Leave? Why would we want you to leave? Because of what happened with Ms. Waverly, Miguel said, confusion creeping into his voice. Ms. Blackwell said she would report me to the administration. Ah yes, Judith always follows protocol. Ms. Rivera waved her hand dismissively. But I'm the head of the piano department, and I'd like to hear your side of the story first. Miguel hesitated. He had worked at Westfield long enough to know that the politics among faculty members could be complicated. There's not much to tell, he said carefully. Ms. Waverly asked for help with her interpretation of the Chopin piece. I offered a few suggestions. A few suggestions that transformed her playing completely, Ms. Rivera said. I've taught Charlotte for 3 years, Mr. Sanchez. She's always been technically proficient but emotionally disconnected from the music. Today she played with a depth of feeling I've never heard from her before. She tilted her head. How did you accomplish in 2 weeks what I couldn't in 3 years? Miguel looked down at his weathered hands. Perhaps she was just ready to hear it. Perhaps, Ms. Rivera agreed. Or perhaps you're a better teacher than you're letting on. She stepped closer. I heard you, you know. Miguel's head snapped up. Ma'am, last week. I arrived early and heard someone playing in practice room 3. It was the most beautiful rendition of Chopin's ballade I'd heard in years. She smiled at his startled expression. Yes, even better than Charlotte's performance today. At first, I thought we had a guest artist visiting. Imagine my surprise when I peeked through the window and saw our janitor sitting at the piano. Miguel's face flushed. I shouldn't have. Where did you study? Ms. Rivera interrupted gently. The question caught him off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked about his past. I didn't, not formally, he admitted. I had lessons with a church pianist in my hometown until I was 16. After that, life took a different turn. Ms. Rivera's eyes widened slightly. You're self-taught? That's even more remarkable. She studied him with newfound curiosity. There's something familiar about your playing style, something I can't quite place. Miguel shrugged uncomfortably. I should finish my work, ma'am. Of course, Ms. Rivera nodded. But before you go, would you play for me? Just once? Miguel stared at her in disbelief. Now, in the recital hall. Everyone's gone home. It will be just you and me. He should refuse. The sensible thing would be to politely decline, finish his shift and pray that this whole incident would blow over. But there was something in Ms. Rivera's eyes, a genuine respect that he hadn't seen directed his way in decades. One piece, he conceded softly. The recital hall was eerily quiet as Miguel followed Ms. Rivera down the center aisle. The stage lights had been dimmed to a soft glow, illuminating the gleaming black grand piano at the center. What would you like me to play? Miguel asked as they reached the stage. Ms. Rivera considered for a moment. Whatever speaks to you. Miguel nodded and climbed the steps to the stage. As he settled onto the bench, memories washed over him. Of competitions he had entered as a boy, of dreams he had abandoned as a young man. He closed his eyes, placed his hands on the keys, and began to play. He chose Liszt's Un Sospiro, a piece he had taught himself during lonely nights after his children had gone to bed. The cascading arpeggios flowed from his fingers like water, the melody singing above them with a yearning that came from the deepest part of his soul. Miguel lost himself in the music, forgetting where he was, forgetting who he had become. For these few minutes, he was simply a musician speaking the language he loved best. When the final notes faded, Miguel opened his eyes to find Ms. Rivera standing motionless at the edge of the stage, one hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Miguel Sanchez, she whispered. It's really you. Confusion clouded Miguel's features. I don't understand. Ms. Rivera climbed the steps to the stage, her eyes never leaving his face. 35 years ago, I was judging a regional competition in Mexico City. There was a 16-year-old boy from a small town who played with such natural brilliance that the entire panel was stunned. We awarded him first place and a scholarship to the National Conservatory. Her voice softened. But he never showed up to claim it. He simply disappeared. Miguel's heart began to pound. How could you possibly remember? Because talent like yours isn't forgotten, Ms. Rivera said firmly. I kept the program from that competition in my teaching journal for years, hoping I might someday hear what became of that promising young pianist. She studied his face. You had more hair then, and fewer lines around your eyes, but the way you move your hands, that hasn't changed at all. Miguel sat frozen on the bench, past and present colliding in his mind. I never knew about the scholarship, he said finally, his voice barely audible. My father died 2 days after the competition. There were medical bills, my mother, my sisters. I never went back to the city. Ms. Rivera's expression softened with understanding. Life gets in the way sometimes. But Miguel, your gift. It's still there, undimmed by time or hardship. Miguel shook his head slowly. It's too late. I'm a janitor now, not a pianist. You're both, Ms. Rivera countered. And more. You're a teacher, as Charlotte's playing clearly demonstrated today. Before Miguel could respond, the doors at the back of the recital hall burst open. Charlotte strode down the aisle, still in her blue performance dress, her face flushed with determination. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said as she reached them, slightly out of breath. But I couldn't leave things like that. It wasn't right what they said to you, Mr. Sanchez. Behind her, two more figures appeared, Zoe and Tyler, looking uncomfortable but curious. We were having a private conversation. Ms. Waverly, Ms. Rivera said, though her tone held no real reproach. I know and I'm sorry, Charlotte replied. But Tyler and Zoe want to apologize. She turned to her friends expectantly. Tyler shuffled his feet. Look, man, Mr. Sanchez, Charlotte told us about how you helped her and, well, I was a jerk. I'm sorry, Zoe nodded. Me too. We had no right to talk to you like that. Miguel was speechless. In 20 years at Westfield, no student had ever apologized to him for anything. Thank you, he managed finally. It's all right. Charlotte stepped forward eagerly. They don't believe me about how amazing you are, though. Would you play something, please, just to show them? Miguel looked to Ms. Rivera, who smiled encouragingly. I think that's an excellent idea, she said. Then more quietly, so only he could hear, it's time the world remembered who you are, Miguel Sanchez. Miguel took a deep breath and turned, back to the piano. As he positioned his hands over the keys, he heard the recital hall doors open again. Glancing up, he saw Ms. Blackwell enter, followed by a few curious students who had been lingering in the lobby, and behind them, to his utter shock, Charlotte's parents. Word had spread quickly through the small crowd of remaining parents and students that something unusual was happening in the recital hall. The janitor was at the piano, and Ms. Rivera, the most respected teacher at Westfield, was standing beside him with tears in her eyes. Miguel's first instinct was to stand up and flee, but then he caught Charlotte's eye. She gave him a small, encouraging nod, and in that moment something shifted inside him. Perhaps it was time to stop hiding. Perhaps it was time to reclaim the part of himself he had buried for so long. He turned to the growing audience and, with a confidence he didn't know he still possessed, began to play Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, the very piece that had started this whole unlikely journey. From the opening notes, a hush fell over the hall. Ms. Blackwell froze halfway down the aisle, her mouth slightly open in shock. Charlotte's father lowered his ever-present phone. Students who had been whispering fell silent. Miguel played with all the passion and technical brilliance that had once marked him as a prodigy. His hands moved across the keyboard with fluid grace, drawing forth not just the notes but the very soul of the composition. The music filled the hall, soaring to the ceiling, wrapping around each listener like an embrace. When he reached the challenging passage that he had helped Charlotte navigate, he played it with a virtuosity that made it seem effortless. Charlotte's eyes widened in awe. This was beyond what she had heard in their morning sessions. This was Miguel playing not as a teacher demonstrating a technique, but as an artist bearing his soul. By the time the final notes echoed through the hall, nearly 30 people had gathered to listen. For a moment after he finished, there was absolute silence. Then, starting with Ms. Rivera and quickly spreading to everyone present, the applause began, hesitant at first, then building to a thunderous standing ovation. Miguel stood and gave a small, humble bow, his eyes shining with unshed tears. After 35 years of silence, his music had finally been heard again. The days following Miguel's impromptu recital passed in a whirlwind of change. Word spread throughout Westfield Academy like wildfire. The janitor was actually a piano virtuoso, a prodigy who had disappeared from the music world decades ago. Students who had never noticed Miguel before now smiled and greeted him in the hallways. Teachers who had previously given him curt nods now stopped to chat about music. For Miguel himself, the sudden attention was both bewildering and uncomfortable. For 20 years he had moved through these halls like a ghost. Now everyone saw him. "You've become quite the celebrity," Lucia teased him over dinner, 3 days after the recital. "My husband, the famous pianist." Miguel shook his head, embarrassed. "It's nothing, mi amor. Just a small school matter." "A small matter?" Rafael, their son, looked up from his engineering textbook. "Dad, Charlotte Waverly posted a video of you playing on social media. It has over 50,000 views already." Miguel nearly choked on his water. "She did what?" Ana, their daughter, pulled out her phone and showed him the video. There he was, in his gray janitor's uniform, playing Chopin with his eyes closed, completely lost in the music. The comment section was filled with amazed responses. "Who is this man? That's not a janitor, that's a concert pianist in disguise. The way he plays Chopin? I'm in tears." Miguel pushed the phone away gently. "I wish she hadn't done that without asking me." Ana squeezed his hand. "Dad, people should know how talented you are. We've always known." Miguel smiled at his children, his heart full. They had grown up hearing him play their small, upright piano in the evenings, but he had never told them about his past as a competition winner, about the dreams he had abandoned. Some stories were too painful to share, even with those you loved most. The next morning, Miguel arrived at work to find Mr. Phillips, the school director, waiting for him in the main office. "Mr. Sanchez," he said, extending his hand. "I believe we need to talk." Miguel followed him into his office, heart sinking. Despite the positive reaction from students and some faculty, he had been half expecting this, his termination for breaking school rules. "Please sit," Mr. Phillips gestured to a chair. He was a tall, thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetually serious expression. "I've heard quite a lot about you in the past few days." "Sir, about what happened with Ms. Waverly?" Mr. Phillips held up his hand. "Ms. Rivera has explained everything. She's quite insistent that we've been overlooking an extraordinary talent." He leaned forward. "Why didn't you ever mention your musical background when you applied to work here?" Miguel looked down at his hands. "I was applying to be a janitor, sir. It didn't seem relevant. And in 20 years you never once thought to mention that you were a piano prodigy? That was another life," Miguel said quietly. "I needed steady work to support my family. Music was a dream I had to set aside." Mr. Phillips studied him for a long moment. "Ms. Rivera has made a rather unusual proposal. She'd like to offer you a position as an assistant piano instructor." Miguel's head jerked up in surprise. "Sir? Part-time to start. You'd keep some of your maintenance duties, but you'd also work with students who could benefit from your unique perspective on musical interpretation." Mr. Phillips adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Rivera believes your approach could be valuable, especially for students who are technically proficient but struggle with emotional expression." Miguel sat in stunned silence. This couldn't be real. "Of course it would mean a significant pay increase," Mr. Phillips continued. "And if it goes well, we could consider a full-time teaching position next year." I don't have the qualifications," Miguel stammered. "No degree, no formal training beyond age 16. Mr. Phillips almost smiled. "After watching that video Ms. Waverly posted, I think your abilities speak for themselves. Besides, Ms. Rivera is one of our most respected faculty members. If she vouches for you, that's good enough for me." Miguel felt lightheaded. After decades of pushing a mop, of watching others live his dream, he was being offered a chance to teach music at one of the most prestigious academies in the country. May I think about it?" he asked. Mr. Phillips nodded. "Of course. Take the weekend. But Mr. Sanchez?" His expression softened slightly. "Don't take too long. Talent like yours shouldn't be wasted on cleaning floors." As Miguel left the office, he found Charlotte waiting for him in the hallway, nervously twisting the strap of her designer backpack. "Mr. Sanchez," she called, hurrying toward him. "I've been looking everywhere for you." "Ms. Waverly," he acknowledged, with a small nod. "I wanted to apologize," she said quickly, "for posting that video without asking. It was wrong of me, and I should have respected your privacy." Miguel sighed. "Why did you do it?" Charlotte looked down. "Because I wanted everyone to see what I saw. To understand that greatness can come from anywhere, not just from privilege and expensive schools." She looked up at him earnestly. "My whole life I've been surrounded by people who think talent is something you buy with lessons and connections. You showed me it's something deeper than that." Miguel was touched by her sincerity. The entitled girl he had first met was slowly being replaced by someone more thoughtful, more aware of the world beyond her privileged bubble. "I forgive you," he said gently. "But next time, ask first." Charlotte nodded eagerly. "I will, I promise, and there's something else." She hesitated. "My parents want to meet you. They're hosting a charity gala for the arts next month, and they want you to perform." Miguel blinked in surprise. The Waverleys were among the wealthiest and most influential families in the city. Their arts gala was a major social event, attended by everyone from local politicians to internationally renowned musicians. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said carefully. "Please consider it," Charlotte pressed. "My father has connections with the symphony orchestra. He knows people at Juilliard, at Curtis, at every major conservatory. This could be a huge opportunity." Miguel shook his head. "Ms. Waverly, Charlotte, I'm 58 years old. It's a bit late for a concert career. But not too late to teach," she countered. "Not too late to share your gift with others." She took a deep breath. "And I was hoping maybe we could play together. A duet." The request caught him by surprise. "A duet?" Charlotte nodded. "The piece we've been working on. I've been practicing the four-hand arrangement. We could perform it together at the gala." The thought of performing on stage with this girl, this student from a world so different from his own, was so unexpected that Miguel didn't know how to respond. "Think about it?" Charlotte asked hopefully. "I will," Miguel promised. 6 months later, the grand ballroom of the Waverly estate was transformed into a concert hall. Hundreds of guests in formal attire sat in rows facing a stage where 2 grand pianos gleamed under professional lighting. Behind the stage, Miguel adjusted his bow tie nervously. The new tuxedo, a gift from the Waverleys, felt strange after decades of work uniforms. "You look very handsome," said Lucia, stunning in a simple blue evening gown. Anna and Raphael stood beside her, both beaming with pride. "I still can't believe this is happening," Miguel murmured. Ms. Rivera approached, elegant in black silk. "Believe it, Miguel. This is long overdue." Charlotte appeared in a modest white dress, her hair pulled back in a simple style that made her look older, more mature than the girl he had first met in practice room 3. "Ready?" she asked, offering him a smile that held none of its former entitlement. Together they walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. The audience included not only the city's elite, but also a special section where the entire student body and faculty of Westfield Academy sat, including Ms. Blackwell, whose pinched expression had softened considerably in recent months. Miguel and Charlotte bowed, then took their places at the pianos. They exchanged a glance and began to play. The piece they had chosen, Rachmaninoff's Suite No. 2 for 2 pianos, filled the ballroom with rich, complex harmonies. Charlotte played with newfound depth and maturity, while Miguel's part soared with the passion he had kept hidden for so many years. As they played, Miguel caught glimpses of his family in the front row, Lucia wiping away tears, Raphael recording proudly on his phone, Anna watching with shining eyes. Behind them sat Mr. Phillips, nodding in satisfaction at his newest faculty member. In the 6 months since his talent had been discovered, Miguel's life had transformed completely. He now taught piano 3 days a week at Westfield, his classes always full, with a waiting list of students eager to learn from him. The other 2 days He taught free lessons at a community center in his own neighborhood, bringing music education to children who, like himself, had talent but lacked resources. The janitor's closet was a thing of the past. Miguel still occasionally joked that he knew where all the best brooms were kept, but his hands now spent their days coaxing music from piano keys rather than pushing mops across floors. As the final notes of the duet rang out, the audience rose, to their feet in a standing ovation. Charlotte turned to Miguel, her expression radiant with the joy that comes from music shared. They stood and bowed together, the wealthy student and the former janitor, united by something that transcended social boundaries and life circumstances. As the applause continued, Thomas Waverly stepped onto the stage with a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "it is my great honor to introduce the Miguel Sanchez Music Scholarship Fund, which will provide full tuition to Westfield Academy for talented students from disadvantaged backgrounds." The applause grew even louder. Miguel stood in stunned silence as Charlotte squeezed his arm in excitement. Later that evening, as guests mingled over champagne and hors d'oeuvres, a young boy from Miguel's community center lessons approached him shyly, clutching a program for an autograph. "Mr. Sanchez," he said, his eyes wide with admiration, "I want to play just like you someday." Miguel knelt down to the child's level. "You will play like yourself," he said gently, "and that will be even better." As he signed the program, Miguel thought about the strange, winding path his life had taken. The dream he had been forced to abandon had never truly left him. It had simply been waiting, dormant for the right moment to bloom again. He looked across the room at Charlotte, who was explaining something about music theory to her formerly dismissive friends with animated gestures. She caught his eye and smiled, a smile of genuine respect and affection. The girl who had once ridiculed a janitor for touching her piano had become the catalyst for his second chance. And in helping him reclaim his gift, she had discovered something equally valuable: the understanding that true greatness comes not from privilege or position, but from passion, perseverance, and the courage to recognize it in others, no matter where they may be found.